What if I told you that your car could run on regular tap water? That many years ago, a man invented a technology that could free us from our dependence on oil forever. His name was Stanley Meyer. He claimed he could drive across America on 80 liters of water. He was offered $1 billion to keep quiet. And one evening, after dinner with investors, he fell down dead, saying, "They poisoned me." Was his technology the greatest breakthrough in history that was hidden from us? Or was it a brilliant scam? And where did the blueprints for the water-powered engine actually disappear to? Today, we will try to find out. The history of humanity is a history of searching. We search for new lands, we search for answers to eternal questions, but above all, we search for energy. Energy is the lifeblood of civilization, the fuel for our machines, the light in our homes, and the heat in our hearths. In the 20th century, it seemed that we had found an almost inexhaustible source: oil. Black gold flowed like a river, powering industry, driving cars and planes. But this source had a dark side: wars over resources, environmental disasters, and the realization that one day it would run out. This was felt particularly acutely in the 1970s, when the global energy crisis hit. Gas prices skyrocketed, and gas stations were lined with miles-long queues. The world suddenly realized its dependence on the whims of oil cartels. It was in this atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty that a dream was born, bold and beautiful in its simplicity. A dream of a car that could run not on expensive and dirty gasoline, but on what covers most of our planet: ordinary water. Imagine a world where you no longer have to pay for fuel. A world where your car's exhaust pipe emits only pure water vapor. A world without smog, oil spills, or wars over resources. This idea seemed like something out of science fiction, a technological utopia that could forever change the course of history. It stirred the minds of self-taught engineers, dreamers, and adventurers around the world. They saw water not just as a liquid to quench thirst, but as a force locked in molecules, an inexhaustible source of clean energy. This dream became a symbol of technological independence, a challenge to the entire existing economic system built on fossil fuels. And then there was a man who said that he wasn't just dreaming, but that he had turned that dream into reality. His story is a dizzying thriller full of brilliant insights, big money, lawsuits, and mysterious deaths. It is a story that makes you wonder, what if free energy were possible, but the world wasn't ready for it? Or, even worse, someone powerful prevented this dream from coming true. This is a story of great hope and even greater disappointment, of the fine line between genius and madness, between revolution and fraud. At the heart of this storm, in the small town of Grove City, Ohio, lived a man named Stanley Allen Meyer. He was neither a professor at a prestigious university nor an engineer at a major automobile corporation. He was what you might call a garage inventor, a self-taught dreamer who believed in the power of his own hands and mind more than in the dogma of official science. Stanley was born in 1940, and from an early age showed a tireless interest in how the world worked. He was constantly designing, dismantling, and assembling things, trying to get to the bottom of how they worked. His neighbors and acquaintances described him as extremely determined, sometimes even obsessed with his ideas. He was not afraid to go against the grain, and possessed a gift of persuasion that could make even the most hardened skeptics believe in his ideas. His biography did not include any notable scientific achievements or prestigious awards, but it did include passion. A passion for invention, and a belief that one person could change the world. He did not seek wealth for wealth's sake. According to his twin brother Stephen, Stanley was a deeply religious man who considered his gift to be divine providence. He believed that he had a mission to give humanity free energy and free it from the shackles of oil dependency. This image of a simple American who challenged all-powerful corporations and governments became a key part of his legend. He did not wear expensive suits or speak at fancy conferences. His platform was his workshop, and his audience was ordinary people who, like him, dreamed of a better future. Meyer had a charisma that attracted followers and, more importantly, investors. He knew how to talk about complex things in simple, understandable language, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of his listeners. He positioned himself not as a businessman, but as a messiah of a new technological era. He claimed that oil companies and government agents were watching his every move, trying to buy or steal his technology. This created an aura of martyrdom and truth-seeking around him, making his story even more appealing. He was David, ready to take on the Goliath of the global energy system, and his slingshot, his main weapon in this battle, was his most famous creation, a modest beach buggy that, according to him, drew its power not from a gas tank, but from a regular bucket of water. At the center of Stanley Meyer's story, like the main character on stage, stood his car. It was not some futuristic concept car, but a modest beach buggy painted bright red. This choice was no accident. The buggy, with its open design and simple frame, clearly demonstrated the absence of a traditional gas tank and the intricate web of wires and tubes that made up its water fuel cell. This red buggy became an icon, a symbol of the revolution that Meyer promised. In the early 1980s, he began conducting his first public demonstrations. Footage from local news reports, shot on grainy film, spread across the country. In them, Stanley Meyer, confident and smiling, fills the tank with water from a regular garden hose, gets behind the wheel, and drives away. To the average person, accustomed to the smell of gasoline and the roar of an internal combustion engine, it looked like a real miracle. The reaction was overwhelming. Local residents and journalists crowded around his garage, trying to unravel the secret. Meyer willingly gave interviews in which he made statements that captured the imagination. The most famous of these claimed that his buggy could travel from Los Angeles to New York, a distance of almost 4,500 kilometers, using only 22 gallons or 83 liters of water. It sounded incredible. The fuel consumption was so low that it seemed impossible. He claimed that his technology could be installed on any existing car, making it potentially available to millions of people. The demonstrations became increasingly ambitious. In one British TV report, Meyer shows a journalist how he disconnects a regular battery, and the engine continues to run, supposedly powered only by his cell. He ignites the gas coming out of the tube to prove that it is combustible hydrogen, not water vapor. These images were a powerful tool of persuasion. They appealed to emotions, bypassing critical thinking. People saw with their own eyes a car running on water. Everything else seemed unimportant. The red buggy became more than just a car. It became living proof, a mobile legend. Its photos were printed in magazines, and it was talked about on TV shows. For his followers, It was the Ark of the Covenant of a new energy era, a tangible artifact proving the righteousness of their prophet. It was this bright, almost toy-like car that became the battering ram that broke through the wall of disbelief and made the whole world talk about Stanley Meyer. What was at the heart of this technological marvel? How did Stanley Meyer, in his own words, manage to circumvent the fundamental laws of physics? The key to everything was his water fuel cell. At first glance, its operation was based on a long-known process: electrolysis. When an electric current is passed through water, its molecules H2O break down into their constituent parts, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. The resulting mixture, known as oxyhydrogen gas or Brown's gas, is extremely flammable. It can be burned in an internal combustion engine to produce energy, and the only product of combustion is water again. The circle is complete. The problem, however, lies in the energy consumption. Classic electrolysis, which is studied in schools, requires a huge amount of energy. And according to the laws of thermodynamics, the energy expended to split water will always be greater than the energy obtained from burning the hydrogen released. Any system based on this principle will be energy inefficient. This is where the main secret and most controversial claim of Stanley Meyer lay. He claimed that his method had nothing to do with crude, rough, direct current electrolysis. He developed a completely new process, which he called the process of dissociating water molecules under the action of voltage. Meyer claimed that instead of breaking through the molecule with the force of the current, he used high voltage and specific electrical pulses to excite it and cause it to resonate. By analogy, it was similar to how an opera singer can break a glass with her voice by using the right frequency. He did not break the glass with a hammer, crude electrolysis, but caused it to break on its own with minimal effort. To do this, he developed a complex electronic circuit, which he called a resonant charging choke. This circuit generated high-voltage pulses of a specific shape and frequency, which, according to him, perfectly matched the natural resonance frequency of water molecules. As a result, he claimed, the water molecule broke down into hydrogen and oxygen, consuming significantly less energy than it released when burned. This was the holy grail that seemed to violate the seemingly unbreakable laws of physics. He was not talking about a chemical reaction, but a physical process at the subatomic level. For skeptics, it was pure pseudoscience, a play on words to confuse investors. For his followers, it was a brilliant breakthrough, the key to new physics and inexhaustible energy. As soon as news of the water-powered machine spread beyond Ohio, it caught the attention of the scientific community, and its reaction was swift, unequivocal, and merciless. For the overwhelming majority of physicists, chemists, and engineers, Stanley Meyer's claims were not revolutionary, but heresy. They contradicted the very foundations, the very bedrock on which all modern science stands. We are talking about the laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of conservation of energy, states that energy cannot be created from nothing or destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. Meyer's device, in his own words, produced more energy than it consumed. It created energy out of nothing, which is a direct violation of this fundamental principle. The second law of thermodynamics is even more severe. It states that in any closed system, entropy, or the measure of disorder, can only increase over time. This means that no energy conversion process can be 100% efficient. There will always be losses, most often in the form of heat. It is impossible to create a perpetual motion machine of the second kind, a machine that would completely convert all thermal energy into useful work. Meyer's system was essentially claimed to be such a perpetual motion machine. It took water, split it, burned hydrogen to produce energy, and directed part of that energy back into splitting a new portion of water, while also moving a 2-ton car. From a physics point of view, this is absurd. It's like trying to lift yourself up by your hair. Scientists pointed out that even if Meyer had found a super-efficient way to electrolyze water, which is doubtful in itself, he still wouldn't have been able to overcome this energy barrier. The energy contained in the chemical bonds of a water molecule is a constant. To break these bonds, you need to expend exactly the same amount of energy as is released when they are formed, in this case, when hydrogen is burned. And that's under ideal conditions, without taking into account inevitable losses due to heat, friction, and other factors. Therefore, the scientific verdict was simple. Stanley Meyer was either mistaken or a fraud. His resonance frequencies and excitation patterns were declared pseudoscientific terminology designed to mask a simple fact. His machine could not work as he described. He was accused of creating yet another variation on the perpetual motion machine, a concept that serious science had rejected centuries ago. This conflict between the lone inventor and the scientific establishment became central to his story. To his supporters, Meyer was a new Galileo, persecuted for ideas that were ahead of their time. To scientists, he was a charlatan who undermined trust in real science and deceived gullible people. Despite fierce criticism from the scientific community, Stanley Meyer continued on his path, and he had a powerful trump card up his sleeve: patents. In the world of inventors, a patent is official recognition of the novelty and uniqueness of a technology, and Meyer managed to obtain more than 20 patents in the US and abroad, describing various aspects of his water fuel cell. This was a powerful argument for investors and supporters. How could the Patent Office issue a document for a device that violated the laws of physics? This question stumped skeptics and fueled theories about Meyer's genius. The U.S. Patent Office does not usually issue patents for perpetual motion machines. However, Meyer's lawyers apparently did a brilliant job. They used very clever and vague wording. The patents described the technology not as a system that produces excess energy, but as a method for obtaining fuel gas from water, or a combustion control system. The emphasis was on the uniqueness of the process itself, the use of voltage, pulses, resonance, and a specific electrode design. The patents described how to do it, but did not directly claim that it violated the law of conservation of energy. They protected a specific design and method, not the end result in the form of free energy. For example, one of the key patents, number 4,936,977, describes in detail the process of water molecule dissociation. It is replete with technical details: concentric stainless steel tubes, pulse generation circuits, water level control. But nowhere does it say that the output energy is greater than the input energy. This allowed him to circumvent the formal restrictions of the Patent Office. For the office, it was simply a new, previously undescribed design for an electrolyzer. Evaluating its effectiveness was not within their competence. However, for Meyer and his followers, these documents were tantamount to recognition. He proudly displayed them in interviews, claiming that if his technology were fraudulent, the government would never have granted him a patent. This created a paradoxical situation. On the one hand, the scientific community called him a charlatan, but on the other, he had official documents confirming the uniqueness of his invention. These patents became his shield and his sword. A shield against accusations of plagiarism and a sword to attract funding. They created the illusion of legitimacy and led many to believe that Meyer was truly on the verge of the greatest discovery in human history. By the mid-1990s, Stanley Meyer had reached the height of his fame. He attracted significant funding from investors who believed in his promises of rapid commercialization of the technology. But it was this money that led to his downfall in the eyes of the law. In 1996, two investors who had invested significant sums in his project took him to court. They claimed that Meyer had sold them the distribution rights to his technology, but had never provided a working device. The case was heard in Franklin County Court, Ohio. This trial was a turning point in the history of the water fuel cell. The court did not rely on words and demonstrations. An independent technical examination was ordered. Experts, including professors from local universities, were tasked with examining Meyer's buggy and rendering their verdict. Meyer initially agreed, but on the day of the examination, he behaved strangely. He refused to provide the cell for detailed examination, claiming that the experts might steal his secrets. Instead, he offered to conduct another demonstration. However, this time it was conducted under strict supervision. The experts insisted on using distilled water and measured the current consumption. The results of the examination presented to the court were devastating. 3 independent experts came to the unanimous conclusion that Meyer's water fuel cell did not produce any abnormal amount of energy. It was a conventional electrolyzer operating on a standard principle. No resonance or voltage-induced dissociation resulting in superunit energy output was found. Judge Roger Henson fully agreed with the experts' conclusions. In his ruling, he described Meyer's invention as gross and egregious fraud. The court ruled that Meyer had misled investors and ordered him to return their money, $25,000. This decision was a crushing blow to Meyer's reputation. For the first time, his technology was not just criticized in the press, but officially recognized as a fraud in a court of law. For skeptics, this was the final nail in the coffin. For his supporters, however, it was just further proof of a conspiracy. They claimed that the expert opinion was biased and the judge had been bribed. They believed that the system had simply found a way to get rid of an inconvenient inventor by using the law as a weapon. But whatever the case, the official verdict had been handed down. The legend of the lone genius cracked, and beneath it emerged the image of a cunning businessman who had deceived his followers. The court decision seemed to put an end to the story of Stanley Meyer, but instead, it became the prologue to its darkest and most tragic chapter. It was after the trial that Meyer and his entourage began to speak more loudly about pressure and threats. The legend they told was worthy of a spy novel. According to them, Meyer was repeatedly approached by mysterious people representing the interests of large oil cartels and even Arab sheikhs. They allegedly offered him fabulous sums of money to stop his research and bury the technology. The most famous story, often retold by Meyer's brother Stephen, tells of a meeting in a restaurant. A man in an expensive suit allegedly approached them and made an offer from the Pentagon, $1 billion for all patents and developments. Stanley, according to his brother, proudly refused, saying, "This technology was given to me by God to help people, not to hide it." Whether to believe this story or not is a matter of personal choice. There is no documentary evidence of this offer. However, it fit perfectly with the image of a selfless fighter for the common good. These stories created an atmosphere of growing paranoia and danger. Meyer became more suspicious, believing that he was being constantly watched. His phones were being tapped, and spies were trying to break into his laboratory. He began to fear for his life. This part of his biography is actively used by conspiracy theorists. They claim that after Meyer failed to be broken in court and bribed, the system resorted to more radical methods. They paint a picture in which a lone inventor finds himself surrounded by enemies. On one side was the scientific establishment, which refused to admit it was wrong. On the other was the all-powerful energy lobby, for whom Meyer's success would mean the loss of trillions of dollars. And on the third was the government, which feared that free energy would lead to economic chaos and a loss of control over the population. In this worldview, Stanley Meyer was not just an unsuccessful businessman, but a sacred victim, a man who had come too close to a forbidden secret. He was a threat to the entire world order, and that threat had to be eliminated. The atmosphere was thickening. The story of a production drama about patents and investments turned into a real thriller. Every stranger seemed like a potential agent, every phone call a threat. The ending of this story, as befits a good thriller, was sudden, shocking, and still controversial. The denouement came on March 21, 1988. That day went down in the annals of conspiracy theories. Stanley Meyer, along with his brother Stephen and two Belgian investors who were interested in his technology, went to dinner at the Cracker Barrel restaurant in his hometown of Grove City. The meeting was crucial. The Belgians were ready to invest serious money and take the project international. It seemed like a new chance after the humiliating trial. Everything was going well. The atmosphere at the table was optimistic, with plans for the future being discussed. At one point, Stanley took a sip from his glass of cranberry juice. Then something strange happened. According to his brother Stephen, who is the main witness to these events, Stanley suddenly grabbed his throat, his face contorted in pain. He jumped up from the table and ran out into the parking lot. Stephen followed him. Outside, Stanley fell to his knees. His last words, which Stephen would repeat in all subsequent interviews, were uttered with difficulty, through convulsions. "They poisoned me." A few moments later, Stanley Meyer was dead. He was only 57 years old. This scene, worthy of a Hollywood movie, was the culmination of his entire life and gave rise to a major mystery. What happened that evening in the restaurant? Was it an accident, a sudden illness, or a cold-blooded, premeditated murder? According to Stephen, the Belgian investors behaved strangely. They showed no particular surprise or sympathy, and their fate remained unknown. They simply disappeared from the story. For Meyer's supporters, everything was obvious. It was a targeted murder. An inventor who could not be broken or bought was simply eliminated. Poisoning is the perfect method. It is difficult to prove, especially if a rare or rapidly decomposing poison is used. Meyer's death at a time when he was on the verge of closing a major deal seemed too suspicious a coincidence to them. The scene in the restaurant parking lot became canonical. It turned Meyer from a controversial inventor into a martyr who fell in the struggle for a bright future for humanity. His last words, "They poisoned me," became a battle cry for his followers, irrefutable proof of a conspiracy, in their opinion. This death shrouded the entire history of the water engine in a thick fog of mystery and made it truly immortal. Stanley Meyer's death immediately sparked a flurry of rumors and speculation. However, the official authorities had their own version of events, which was much more prosaic and devoid of any mysticism. The Grove City Police and the Franklin County coroner conducted an investigation. An autopsy was performed and toxicology samples were taken. 3 months later, the official verdict was announced. According to the coroner's report, Stanley Meyer's cause of death was a cerebral aneurysm. This is a sudden hemorrhage in the brain, often associated with high blood pressure, and can be triggered by stress. Toxicological tests found no known poisons in his body. From the authorities' point of view, everything was crystal clear. A middle-aged man who led a very stressful life full of lawsuits, financial problems, and possibly paranoia died of natural causes. His last words about poisoning were attributed to the agony and confusion that often accompany a stroke or aneurysm. The man could have felt sudden, sharp pain and misinterpreted it as the result of external influence. This version was logical, supported by medical data, and did not require the involvement of theories about global conspiracies. But it did not satisfy Meyer's family and followers. His brother Stephen insisted until the end of his life that the autopsy was poorly conducted and that the authorities deliberately concealed the truth. He insisted that Stanley was in perfect health, underwent regular medical examinations, and had no blood pressure problems. Conspiracy theorists put forward their own version of events. They claimed that Meyer had been poisoned with a rare exotic poison that could not be detected by standard methods, or with a poison that quickly breaks down in the body without leaving any traces. Various substances were suggested, from thallium salts to military-grade poisons available only to special services. Thus, the world was left with two diametrically opposed interpretations of the same event. On the one hand, there was a boring but logical medical conclusion. On the other, there was an exciting but unprovable story of a secret murder. The truth, as is often the case, turned out to be a matter of faith. If you believe in the laws of physics and official medicine, then Meyer died a natural death. If you believe in conspiracies and the suppression of technology, then he was murdered. It is this duality that makes Meyer's story so enduring. It offers everyone the chance to choose the version that suits them best. It leaves room for mystery and doubt. The official report closed the case legally, but it failed to close it in the minds of thousands of people around the world who still believe that on that March evening in an Ohio restaurant parking lot, it was not just a dream that was killed, but a real opportunity to change the world. The inventor's death was the final act of the drama, but it also raised the main question: what happened to his legacy? If the technology was real, where were the blueprints, prototypes, and lab journals? Where did the keys to the energy revolution disappear to? Here, witness statements and versions of events diverge even more than in the story of his death. Meyer's brother, Stephen, claimed that federal agents raided their home the day after the tragedy. According to him, they confiscated all the equipment from Stanley's laboratory, including the famous red buggy, all patents, drawings, and records. Everything was taken away to an unknown destination under the pretext of national interests. This version is canonical for conspiracy theorists. It explains why no one has ever been able to accurately reproduce Meyer's technology. The secret was not simply lost, it was deliberately removed and hidden by the very forces that, in their opinion, were behind the inventor's murder. The red buggy, the main piece of evidence, simply disappeared. However, there is another, less dramatic version. According to it, there was no raid by the Secret Services. After Meyer's death, his property, including laboratory equipment, remained with his family and associates. But without Stanley himself, without his genius and understanding of the intricacies of the process, all this hardware and paperwork proved useless. Perhaps there was some kind of secret ingredient, a specific frequency, material, or procedure that Meyer kept in his head and trusted no one with. With the death of the keeper of the secret, the technology itself died. As for the buggy itself, its traces have indeed been lost. According to one version, it rusted in a garage for a long time and was then dismantled for parts or sold. There is no convincing evidence that it was confiscated. Today, Stanley Meyer's patents are in the public domain. Anyone can download them from the internet and try to build their own water fuel cell. Thousands of enthusiasts around the world are doing just that. However, no one has ever managed to create a device that would demonstrate super-efficient performance and could pass independent testing. This is the strongest argument of the skeptics. If the technology is so simple and everything is described in the patents, why has no one been able to replicate it in more than 20 years? Thus, the disappearance of the drawings is more of a metaphor. The physical documents and patents have not gone anywhere. Something else has disappeared. Proof of the device's viability. Meyer himself disappeared, the only person who could make this design work, or at least make everyone believe that it works. The mystery of the blueprints is the mystery of Meyer himself. Were they the plans for a revolutionary device, or just a clever prop for a brilliant showman? The answer to this question may be lost forever, along with its author. The story of Stanley Meyer, for all its uniqueness, is not an isolated case. The idea of a water car is as old as the world itself, and periodically resurfaces in different corners of the planet, each time acquiring new details and conspiracy theories. One of Meyer's most famous colleagues was Filipino inventor Daniel Dingle. He claimed to have developed a process for converting water into fuel back in 1969. His story largely mirrors that of Meyer. Demonstrations of a working car, claims of a breakthrough, interest from investors and authorities, and then accusations of fraud and oblivion. Dingle claimed that even the president of the Philippines was interested in his technology, but he ended up in prison and his designs disappeared. Another character in this saga is American Herman Anderson. In 1972, he demonstrated his Chevrolet Cavalier, which, according to him, ran on a mixture of water and hydrogen produced directly on board. Anderson, like Meyer, claimed that he had received threats from oil companies and that attempts had been made to buy his technology in order to bury it. His designs were also never widely distributed and faded into obscurity. In Japan, the so-called water car from Genepax gained widespread fame. In 2008, the company presented a car that supposedly ran on any kind of water: rain, river, and even tea. The news spread around the world, causing a sensation. However, the company soon faced harsh criticism from the scientific community. Experts pointed out that their reactor used expensive metal hydride, which is essentially fuel, with water acting only as a reagent. In other words, it was not a water car, but a metal hydride car, and the cost of the fuel was enormous. Soon, the company ceased operations and its website disappeared from the internet. These and many other stories create a certain pattern. A lone inventor announces a revolutionary discovery. Successful but poorly documented demonstrations are held. Investors appear. Then either accusations of fraud follow, or stories of threats and pressure from the big guys. In the end, the technology mysteriously disappears without ever reaching mass production. For skeptics, this pattern only proves that all of this is variations on the same fraudulent scheme. For conspiracy theorists, it is evidence of a systematic and global campaign to suppress free energy. They see these isolated cases as links in a chain, proving that as soon as someone gets close to the truth, the system destroys them. Stanley Meyer stands out in this group only because of the drama surrounding his death, which has given his story the status of a sacred legend. Why is the story of Stanley Meyer and others like him so appealing? Because it appeals to one of the most powerful conspiracy theories, the theory of suppression of breakthrough technologies. This theory states that there are many ingenious inventions in the world that could radically improve our lives, but they are being hidden from us by powerful forces that have no interest in change. The eternal light bulb, the cure for all diseases, and, of course, free energy. In this worldview, energy corporations are portrayed as sinister octopuses with tentacles wrapped around the entire world. Their wealth is built on scarcity, on the fact that energy must be paid for. Any invention that makes energy cheap, accessible, and uncontrollable poses an existential threat to them. It's not just a loss of profit, it's the collapse of their entire business empire. Therefore, according to this theory, they have special departments dedicated to hunting inventors. Their methods are varied and ruthless. First, the inventor is offered huge sums of money for his patent with the sole purpose of silencing him. If he refuses, they try to discredit him in the press and scientific community, portraying him as a charlatan. If that doesn't work, they resort to lawsuits and fabricated charges that ruin and destroy the person. And if the inventor proves too stubborn and persistent, he may simply be physically eliminated, disguised as an accident or sudden illness. Governments in this scheme act either as passive observers or as active accomplices of corporations. After all, their power is largely based on fuel taxes and control over energy infrastructure. Free energy means a loss of leverage and economic chaos. This theory is very convenient because it explains everything. It explains why we still drive gasoline-powered cars, why we get sick, why the world is the way it is. It provides a simple and understandable enemy to blame for all our problems. The story of Stanley Meyer is a perfect illustration of this theory. It has all the necessary elements: a lone genius, a revolutionary invention, a refusal to sell out, legal persecution, mysterious threats, and, finally, a martyr's death. He is the perfect hero for this epic. Of course, there is no direct evidence for this theory. No former employee of the Inventor Elimination Department has written a memoir. But supporters of the theory explain the lack of evidence by the omnipotence of the conspirators. Anyone who tries to reveal the truth will be immediately destroyed. This creates a vicious circle in which belief requires no confirmation. Decades have passed since Stanley Meyer's death, but his ghost still haunts garages and internet forums of enthusiasts around the world. His patents, as we have already mentioned, are publicly available, and this has spawned a whole movement of Meyer followers. These are people who do not believe either official science or the official version of his death. They are convinced that Meyer was a genius and that his technology is real. They gather information bit by bit, They study his patents, watch old videos of demonstrations, and read the memoirs of his colleagues. In their workshops, they try to recreate the water fuel cell. They experiment with the shape of the electrodes, select materials, and try to tune the very resonance frequency. Their forums are full of heated debates about how to correctly interpret this or that diagram from the patent. Some of these enthusiasts claim to have achieved success. They post videos on YouTube showing their homemade cells producing what they believe to be an abnormally large amount of gas with low current consumption. They connect them to small motors, which start to work. However, none of these demonstrations have yet withstood rigorous scientific testing. As a rule, it turns out that either the current and voltage measurements were taken incorrectly or other factors were not taken into account. No one has been able to present a device that works consistently and can be sent to an independent laboratory to confirm the superunit effect. Skeptics see this movement as nothing more than a tragicomedy, collective self-hypnosis. But what if we look at it from another angle? What if there was some rational grain in Meyer's technology that was misunderstood by both him and his critics? Some modern researchers, unrelated to conspiracy theories, suggest that Meyer may have accidentally stumbled upon some little-studied effect in the field of plasma physics or cavitation. Perhaps his device really did produce electrolysis more efficiently than standard installations, even if it did not violate the laws of thermodynamics. Perhaps his resonance was not a myth, but a real way to optimize the process. However, without sufficient scientific background, Meyer himself did not fully understand what he had discovered and presented it in a pseudoscientific form, which caused rejection among scientists. Then, in an attempt to attract investors, he began to exaggerate the capabilities of his device, crossing the line between optimization and a perpetual motion machine. In this interpretation, he appears neither a genius nor a fraud, but a tragic figure who found something interesting but was unable to understand or properly present it to the world. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. So who was Stanley Meyer in the end? And where did his dream go? The story of the water engine leaves us with more questions than answers. Like a complex mirror, it reflects our own hopes, fears, and prejudices. For those who believe in the limitless possibilities of the human mind and the existence of conspiracies, Stanley Meyer is a prophet and a martyr, a genius who fell at the hands of a shadow government and oil barons who feared his gift to humanity. His story is the sacred scripture of a new faith, a faith in free energy. His buggy is the lost ark, and his blueprints are the stolen tablets. For those who trust science and are skeptical of miracles, Stanley Meyer is a skilled showman, if not a fraud. A talented engineer who used his knowledge of electronics to create an impressive but essentially meaningless show. He skillfully played on humanity's eternal dream of getting something for nothing and distrust of authority to attract investors' money. His death was a tragic accident that his followers turned into a myth to preserve their faith. But there is a third point of view. Perhaps Stanley Meyer was both. A dreamer who sincerely believed in his mission, but in his pursuit of recognition and funding crossed the line between scientific research and mystification. He may have been a man who really found a way to make electrolysis more efficient, but he couldn't resist the temptation to declare his discovery an eternal engine. As for his legacy, it turned out to be ambiguous. On the one hand, the name Stanley Meyer became synonymous with pseudoscience, a warning to real scientists and engineers. On the other hand, his story, albeit in a mythologized form, popularized the very idea of hydrogen energy. He made millions of people think about alternative fuel sources. Perhaps Meyer's main contribution to history is not his technology, but his story. It is a modern myth that will live forever because it touches the deepest chords of our soul. The struggle of the individual against the system, the dream of justice, and the belief that somewhere, just around the corner, a better world with clean air and free energy awaits us. Whether this world was ever possible and where the keys to it have gone is a question that will probably remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century.